Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the Wilmington and Philadelphia 2020 Women on Boards Conversation on Board Diversity. My name is Jen Smuts, and I'm honored to be co-chairing this year's event with my friends Elaine Bittner and Lynn Evans. Elaine, we have over 200 guests joining us today, which is like double the number that we had last year at our inaugural event.
Thank you, Jen. 200 is a great number. I think it speaks to the significance of this very important topic today, women on boards and board diversity. Welcome, everyone. I'm Elaine Bittner, co-chair of 2020 Women on Boards. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with you today. On behalf of Jen Smuts, Lynn Evans, and the entire executive leadership team, we're very excited to bring 2020 Women on Boards to you virtually today. As Jen mentioned, it's so inspiring that we have double the audience this year. And so we're very excited to have you all with us today. So what are we doing here today? As the late and great Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, women belong in all places where decisions are being made. So thank you for being with us here today. Before I turn it back over to Jen, I'd like to take a few moments just to recognize some of our sponsors. First, I'd like to give special recognition to our global sponsors who are supporting us in multiple cities. So thank you, BNY Mellon Wealth Management, Bank of America, RBC Wealth Management, McKinsey & Company, EY, and last but not least, Zoom. Also, a huge thank you to our local Wilmington, Philadelphia sponsors. A special shout out to Affinity Wealth Management, Wispis, Richard Slayton and Finger, Young Conaway, Stargate and Taylor, CSC, Christiana Care, and Women's Leadership Initiative at the University of Delaware. There were also several community sponsors and partners that helped us: Insight, Ballard Spar, Connolly Gallagher, and Advanced Energy Experts. And a special thank you to our amazing co-chairs, Jen Smuts and Lynn Evans, and our entire executive leadership committee. Without our fabulous committee, we wouldn't have been able to bring this to you here today. So thank you, and thank you to our sponsors.
Yes, thank you, Elaine, and thank you again to our sponsors. We know it's been a tough year, but you guys pulled through for us, so we're really appreciative of that. With that, our Wilmington and Philadelphia community, you know, we're committed, we're special, we're committed to equity, inclusion, diversity of thought, and collectively, we're part of a movement. So this movement is to promote women and greater diversity. And this movement requires all of us. It's not just about women, it includes men, directors, co-leaders, community members. So we know diversity is important, but it's important for reasons beyond the right thing to do. A lot of times people say, well, why is that? Well, why and what it is, you know, the data shows us. It shows us that having women on boards is good business. Companies with diverse boards perform better. We saw recently, as of this morning, like NASDAQ is now requiring companies who are listed to have diverse boards. So good on you. Let's keep doing this. Another reason is companies have many stakeholders. They have customers, they have employees, investors, the communities in which they reside. So these stakeholders have diverse viewpoints, and it's really important that those perspectives are seen and heard within the boardroom. And a third reason is diversity of thought is proven to promote better ideas. It improves decision-making. When all the directors in the boardroom look alike and sound alike, this creates an issue called groupthink, and it stifles innovation. We have to get away from that. You know, we've heard so many calls this year alone, and we're making it happen. So these are the themes of topics of today's discussion. We have an exciting program for you today, and I'm really thrilled that 2020 Women on Boards founder Stephanie Sonneman is joining us today. She's going to kick us off with some data showcasing the progression of both Delaware and Pennsylvania, how we're faring compared to the rest of our country with women on boards. And then following Stephanie, we're going to move to the panel portion of the program. And then immediately following the panel, you are each encouraged to take this time for yourself, join the breakout room sessions, and talk to some of the region's most experienced director coaches that we brought on board this year. This is something that we didn't do last year at last year's event, and I felt like we really missed out on an opportunity. So we're bringing it to you this year. So please make sure you stay on and participate with our director coaches. So at this point, I will welcome Stephanie Sonnabend, founder of the 2020 Women on Boards. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Jen and Elaine. It's great to be with you. And I want to especially thank all of our sponsors, our co-chairs, leadership committee, director coaches, and especially all of you for participating in this event today. This year, we celebrate the 10th year of the 2020 Women on Boards campaign, the second year of the Wilmington Conversation on Board Diversity, with Philadelphia joining the conversation for the first time. It's an exciting time for the 2020 Women on Boards campaign. And it's especially an exciting day because hot off the press, we just heard this morning that Adina Friedman from NASDAQ, the NASDAQ CEO, is asking the SEC to whether NASDAQ can require that all companies have at least one woman and one individual from an underrepresented group on their boards. So that will be a major development if they get NASDAQ gets permission to do that. So year over year, we report on the number of women on corporate boards on the Russell 3000, the largest publicly traded companies in the US, which we feature on our Gender Diversity Index and database published annually on our website. When we started the campaign in 2010, the percentage of women on the Russell 3000 had been stagnant at around 10.6%. And since then, and since we started the campaign, the number of women has steadily increased. In the past 4 years, going from 16.0% nationally to 22.6% women on boards of the Russell 3000 companies in 2020. Over the same period, the percentage of women directors on Russell 3000 companies headquartered in Delaware and Pennsylvania has increased from 24.3% to 28.6% in Delaware, and from 15% to 20.7% in Pennsylvania. Delaware, with its 12 companies, has always been well above average, while Pennsylvania, with 134 companies on the Russell 3000, slightly trails the national average. Among the 25 states, there we go. Among the 25 states in the US that have more than 20 companies on the Russell 3000, all but 2, Florida and Utah, exceeded the 20% goal for women on their boards this year. The states that achieved more than 20% for the first time are Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and Texas. Of the 12 companies headquartered in Delaware, 86% are at 20% or greater, what we call winning companies, W companies. And when you combine Philadelphia and Delaware, the percentage of W companies with 20% or more women drops to 52% of the companies. There are 34 women directors on Delaware headquartered companies and 256 women on Pennsylvania headquartered companies. So imagine all Delaware and Pennsylvania companies on the Russell 3000 had 20% or more women on their boards. All that is needed is between 85 and 95 women, depending on whether they add a seat or retire a man. That's 2 women in Delaware, and the remainder, 83 to 93 women in Pennsylvania. It's actually not that big a hurdle to overcome. And perhaps a number of you here today will be those next women joining boards. This year, we celebrate our success and the completion of the first phase of the campaign. Yet we all know the 20% goal is no longer good enough. As Melanie Dobson said at the Global Conversation on November 12th, we are pleased but not satisfied. In 2021, the new campaign will advocate for gender balanced boards. This is a bold goal, but we've always been a bold organization. Today, there is one gender balanced board in Delaware and 5 in Pennsylvania, and 163 companies nationwide, which means only 5% are gender balanced. So we have our work cut out for us. The vision of the new campaign is that all public companies will be gender balanced, with women holding half of the corporate board seats. And our new name will be 50-50 Women on Boards. Our new campaign will continue to educate, collaborate, and advocate for more women on boards. And we'll continue with our programs. Our highly popular virtual Get On Board workshop will resume in February 2021, helping board-ready women position themselves and network to get on a board. And I'm very pleased to announce our new program launching in the first quarter of 2021, Path to the Boardroom. This is for women in mid-career looking to serve on a board in 5 to 10 years. For more information about our new programs and events, and to receive the latest news and updates, visit us at 2020wob.com, soon to be 5050wob.com, and continue to engage with us on social media. Now let's welcome back Elaine back to the stage to introduce the panel.
Thank you, Stephanie. Those are great statistics for Delaware and Pennsylvania, and I love that expression that we're not satisfied. But it's great to see that we've exceeded the 20% goal, and I'm really excited about the 50-50 gender balanced women on board. So thanks for sharing all that great information, Stephanie, and being with us here today. The next portion of our program is our esteemed VIP panel, and we brought together a great lineup today, and they will be moderated by our executive leadership team committee member, Deneen Damon. And let me tell you a little bit about Deneen. She's fantastic. She's the president of Richards, Layton & Finger. In addition to her key roles within the firm, she's held numerous leadership positions in the American Bar Association, the Delaware State Bar Association, and other organizations. She serves on numerous boards. More notably, she is the chair of the Christiana Care Health System Board. Deneen has been recognized nationally and internationally, and she is a mentor and a friend to many women, including myself. So it's great to be here with you, Deneen, and thank you so much for moderating our panel today.
Thanks, Elaine. It is absolutely a pleasure. I have to say, this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, has been for a very long time. Positioning women to get on boards and encouraging boards to increase the number of women, not just because it's the right thing to do, but absolutely because it's a business imperative. It's something that I feel very, very strongly about. So it's my honor and a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much. I am thrilled to be able to introduce our panelists. These are powerhouse women who have been exceptional in their careers and who are going to give us a great conversation today, not only about their role in terms of their service on boards, but also their leadership positions and the interaction that they have with the women, the boards in general, and the women on their boards. So hearing firsthand from these women the significance of having gender diversity in the room, and in particular, how that played out during a time of crisis, as we've been struggling with during the COVID-19 pandemic. So Elaine, thank you so much. Really appreciate you and the leadership team inviting us to speak today. And I am now going to introduce our panel, and we're going to get into it. And so I would ask our panel to come on screen, and I will give a little bit of background for each of them. I'll ask the audience to bear with me a moment because they're so accomplished. I want to make sure I don't miss anything in their bios. So Soledad Alfaro is the Chief Administrative Officer for the Philadelphia International Airport. It actually is a hub airport that serves over 32 million passengers annually. Ms. Alfaro leads several branches of the business, including strategy, human resources, information security, communications, government affairs, diversity and inclusion, and administrative operations. Before joining the airport, she was the Deputy Chief of Staff for the Mastery Charter School Network. She's also worked in nonprofit education organizations, building internal capacity, developing systems, and advancing strategy in support of educational equity for children of color living in marginalized communities. Ms. Alfaro completed her bachelor's degree in biology at the University of Colorado, a master's degree in urban education from Temple University, and she holds an MBA from the Fox School of Business at Temple University. Soledad, thank you for joining us today. Jennifer Cohen is the CEO of Leadership Delaware. Jennifer was appointed in January of 2015 to lead the Delaware Department of Transportation, otherwise known as DelDOT, becoming the third woman to serve in this role in the department's 100-year history. Prior to her appointment, Jennifer served as the director of the Delaware Division of Motor Vehicles for 8 years, and her state public service career has spanned more than 28 years in total. Her previous work includes serving as the financial program manager at the Delaware Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control, DNREC, managing the state's clean water program, and working with the Delaware State Legislature within the Office of the Comptroller General. Ms. Cohen has also held an array of leadership positions within DelDOT in the areas of planning, finance, and motor carrier safety. Jennifer graduated from Wilmington University with a Bachelor of Science in Business Management and a Master of Science in Public Administration, and she attended the Fels Institute of Government at the University of Pennsylvania. She remains involved with Wilmington University as an adjunct professor, teaching leadership and public policy in the master's program. She currently serves as Vice President of the Northeast Association of the State Transportation Officials, Vice Chair of the ITS America Board of Directors, and Chair of the I-95 Corridor Coalition's Executive Board. In addition, she's a member of the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials Board of Directors, the Northeast Corridor Commission, the National Operations Center of Excellence Board of Directors, and the Vehicle to Infrastructure Deployment Coalition. In November of 2020, Jennifer retired from state government to become CEO of Leadership Delaware. So she now sits in the instrumental role of preparing the next generation of leaders for our state. Thank you, Jennifer, for joining us. Last but certainly not least is Sharon Kurfürst. Sharon is the Chief Operating Officer for Christiana Care Health System. Sharon is responsible for the development and execution of core enterprise business processes and functions, including campus operations for Newark, Middletown, Wilmington, and Cecil County, clinical essential services, corporate compliance, facilities and services, safety and security, real estate, retail strategy and expansion, and design and construction activities. Sharon has a doctoral degree in adult education from Widener University, Chester, Pennsylvania, and a bachelor's degree in occupational therapy from College Misericordia, Dallas, PA. She's a frequent national presenter on topics in rehabilitation, healthcare leadership, and academic healthcare system partnerships, and she's been published several times on these topics. She's a frequent lecturer for other healthcare providers and universities. In addition to her role at Christiana Care, she sits on several local boards focused on activities in education and serving vulnerable populations. Most notably, she's on the board of the Wilmington Hope Commission, the Brandywine Counseling and Community Service, and she's chair of the Delaware Military Academy. Sharon, thank you as well for joining us today. I had to read their backgrounds because, as you heard, These are three incredibly accomplished women who bring that leadership perspective to our conversation on the importance of board diversity. So I'm going to get right into it, and I'm going to lead off with a question that stems from some of the statistical information that Stephanie shared with us a few minutes ago. We heard the numbers, and we also heard the commentary that we're pleased but not satisfied. So there's been a focus on diversifying boards. There's been a focus on getting more women in the boardroom. So I would like to start with the question of why. We've heard a little bit of the anecdotal information when Jen was giving the introduction about the importance of innovation and having a woman's perspective in the room. But let's dig a little bit deeper and talk about why that's so important and why the statistics, where they are today and where we're looking to go, are so meaningful. And Sharon, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thanks, Deneen. So a couple of thoughts around this. First, when we look at the percentage of consumers that are women, the percentage of the workforce that is women, investors, business owners, those numbers are in the 40, 50 and up percentiles. And it's really important that the boards that help to strategically plan, vision for, and lead organizations that serve this population of women are reflective of the population that they serve. And so, in order to have those groups' best interests in mind, we need boards that look like the constituents that they are leading and serving. And so women play an important role, both in the board seat, but also in how our economy moves forward, how healthcare decisions are made, how general leadership decisions are made. And to have a disconnect between the highest level of an organization and the community that it serves or represents creates a whole host of problems and concerns that I'm sure we're going to get into as we move forward. So those statistics are really important from that perspective. And you heard it in the introduction, and I actually saw it on the chat from someone as well. We need to think of diversity in the broadest sense here, right? Diversity in terms of gender equity, but also diversity in terms of racial equity, socioeconomic diversity. All of that leads to diversity of thought that can only move organizations and the culture of those organizations forward. It brings a different level of listening, a different level of sensitivity to issues, and a different level of prioritization of things that need to be executed in order to move an organization forward.
It's interesting when you talk about from a consumer's perspective, the role that women play. I mean, certainly we hear in healthcare all the time that women are the primary decision makers when it comes to healthcare for not only themselves, but their families. And I guess I'll throw that same question and ask Soledad and Jennifer to jump in as well. And so Soledad, why don't we start with you? And so from your perspective, sitting at the Philadelphia International Airport and thinking about it in terms of the 32 million passengers that pass through, does that same statement hold true when you move out of healthcare and you move into an industry such as transportation?
Absolutely. And I think, Sharon summed it up really well. Diversity, and it's been proven, right? Not in just on boards, but in leadership and organizations, really strengthens organizations for lots of reasons. It's good for your business, it's good for your bottom line, all of those things. It's also really important to mirror your client base. And we are an international airport, which means that we really want to make sure that we are responsive to and understanding of people who speak different languages, people who have different priority focuses when they're traveling through an airport, right? The business traveler is one kind of set of consumers that travel through an airport, but we in this region have many, many universities that have many, many students from different parts of the world. So it's important to understand, what does it feel like to transition through this space if I don't necessarily speak the language or I'm able to read the signs, right? So all of those things, I think, give us a better perspective on how we serve our passengers and how they move through the airport. The other thing that I would also mention, because I've been a beneficiary of this, is that women leaders also have a different peer group, right? So we know that boards, people who get introduced to boards or positions, usually it's through your network. And so I was a beneficiary of being introduced to my current role, or the role I had before this one, by a woman that I worked with at a different organization and was hired by a woman. And I think sometimes we don't realize how important those connections are because we tend to look for people who are similar to us when we hire or when we nominate for boards. So I think that the more we can increase the diversity, the more we will increase the diversity. So I think that it's everything that Sharon said is reinforced in the transportation industry, both from a customer service standpoint, but also from an operational standpoint.
You know, it's a really interesting point. And Jen, I would ask you to respond to that, but in a slightly different way. So one of the comments Soledad just made is about the network and being identified by women leaders for board positions and having that network to even get into those board seats to begin with. Thinking about your leadership journey, how important was it for you to have a woman leader really help to open those doors and create those networks? And sitting in the leadership positions that you've been in and the new leadership position that you're in now, how does that translate into a board? What is the relationship between the leadership and the board that makes that so critical?
No, that's a great point, and it is very, very critical, and that's why I was so excited to be part of this panel. It is critical that women help women, and one of the things that I think is important to note is that, you know, we don't want 50 by, you know, we don't want 50-50 just for the sake of having 50-50. We want to pick amazing women to put on boards and, you know, and express that leadership, and not just, I mean, we need to have, and I think Sharon stated this, is that if your board does not reflect the population in which you serve, then your business is not going to be optimized, period. And that means not just women, but, you know, especially here in Delaware, Hispanic women, Black women. I mean, you have to be very inclusive of that, and it takes a concerted effort. And I think that's the responsibility of every woman, is to, you know, help and lift up each other. And it is very critical to make sure that you have, you know, and on this panel now, I mean, there's several people who, you know, I have helped and will continue to do so, but it takes that concerted effort by as many of us as possible to make sure that we pick the right women and that they pay that forward to others as well. It's absolutely critical.
I could not agree more. It is absolutely critical, is right. But it's interesting at the same time, you know, we've all heard it said that nominating committees for boards should be gender blind. You know, there shouldn't be a focus on gender. There shouldn't be a focus on specific races or ethnicities. You should only be looking at skills. You should only be looking at experiences. I think the four of us would agree that perhaps that's not necessarily an accurate or best practice approach, but we hear it time and time again. And so how do you respond to those comments when they say it's not about gender, it's about skill and experience? Sharon, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thanks, Deneen. So I think it's naive to want to be anything blind when you're looking to surround yourself with high quality people and creating, you know, a diverse board or a diverse leadership team within an organization. And I too am a huge advocate of focusing on skills and capabilities. And that being said, I believe women bring a unique set of skills and capabilities to leadership and to boards that maybe our male counterparts don't always bring to the same degree. And so, you know, I do think there's, you know, a huge importance in focusing on how do I create the most diverse, well-rounded board that or management team that serves an organization that I can. And you can't do that being blind. I think that would be naive. So those skills and capabilities come in different genders, in different races, and in different people. And we need to be really open to thinking about who can round out the board, who can contribute best to the board. And to do that, absence of solid female representation, I think is underestimating the skills, capabilities, and power that women bring to those groups.
I could not agree more. And Jen, I'll throw this next question to you, because one of the things that Sharon just highlighted is something that I talk about all the time. I find it incredibly frustrating when there are conversations around trying to find qualified individuals for a board. And the statement is, but we need a certain type of expertise. We need a certain level of experience. And there's almost an assumption that expectation in terms of experience and expertise can't go hand in hand with gender diversity, that for some reason they're mutually exclusive. So can you speak to that for a moment, and how we can start to think differently within our own networks in trying to address that issue?
Sure, but to be completely candid with that, sometimes that is the case, and I'll give you a perfect example. In the engineering field, it's very hard just because females are not going into the STEM fields in the way that we think that they should. So what we actually need to do is not just focus on our networks, but they constantly, I hear, like Sharon said, we need the skill set, we need this ability. We've got to grow those female leaders. Women make up more than 50% of the workforce, right? But we're still only like 24% of the STEM fields. And we've got to get to young girls in a timely fashion so that they know that they can be engineers and, in these STEM fields, so that we're growing, we have that constant pipeline of female leaders, because sadly, in some cases, that is the fact that there aren't enough women to choose from. But you've got to consciously go out and find them. And, shameless plug for Leadership Delaware, we've got tons of them here. So if anybody's looking, please come talk to us, because we've got a ton. But yeah, you really need to focus on that. And really, it's something that's really near and dear to my heart, is making sure that we get to young girls so that they know that they can grow up and be, first of all, be anything that they want to be. But these STEM fields are cool jobs, and that is going to be our future pipeline. So we can just eradicate that conversation completely.
No, I love that comment. And it makes me think about, another aspect of this that's sort of tangential to this part of the conversation, but it's that relationship again between the leaders in the organization and those on the board, and how you're finding the right individuals to serve on the board. I'd like to ask each of you to speak very briefly to your experience as a leader working with the board of your organization. What is the current composition? Do you find that it's male dominated? Do you find that there's been difficulty finding qualified women or getting support to increase diversity on the boards? And what's the impact of that had sort of broadly on your organization? And then we'll sort of get into the pandemic. So Soledad, why don't we start with you in terms of your relationship and experience with the board?
Sure. So we're in a little bit of a unique position at the airport. We actually have an advisory board. So they're not a governing board. It does tend to be more male dominated. And I think, and Jen can speak to this too, transportation tends to be pretty male dominated, aviation, very male dominated. The relationship is very much, we work really hard to give lots of information and the correct information, because board members and being a board member at times in my career, you don't always have the full picture in the same way that management does. And so it's this delicate balance between making sure you give all of the information that a board member might need to make a decision versus like, don't bog me down in the weeds, right? So we definitely walk that tightrope, similar to the relationships that I've had on boards in the past. It is interesting to watch my to watch my CEO kind of navigate some of that, that kind of male dominant, like when people tend to cut her off or, you know, think that she's maybe not making the exact point that they want to hear. And I think we as women tend to be very good at exerting ourselves, right? I'm speaking right now, right? I love that quote. And not being afraid to know what you know and speak up, I think has been lots of the lessons that I've learned in those rooms. And one shameless plug also from me about STEM. So being a STEM graduate, and I saw my friend Sharon on there, who's an engineer also. STEM goes red. We just, for the American Heart Association in Philadelphia, we just had our event with about 200 girls in high school. So I implore all of you to support young girls who are interested in STEM fields, because we do need to build those pipelines. And also, I find that sometimes that's an excuse, and it's a little bit of a cop-out when, from a talent perspective, sometimes leaders say, well, there are no this. And again, it goes back to, well, where are you looking? And what does your network look like? And so I just wanted to, sorry to go back a question or two, but I just wanted to make that point.
No, I think it's an important point to make, and I appreciate that. Jennifer, why don't we go to you next? What about your relationship currently or previously with the board, and, you know, male dominated, not male dominated, and how did that impact that relationship?
Yes, so in my previous role as Secretary of Transportation, I can tell you, so that is completely correct. Transportation is completely male, and not just male dominated, white male dominated throughout the country. I remember my first national meeting that I went to, which was all of the transportation CEOs across the country. There was 3 women, that was it. And I remember it was very difficult to get a seat to be heard at that table. So it was, you know, you gotta push your way in, and sometimes that's just what has to happen. So often, what I see with women that frustrates me is they let their comfort zone dictate their capacity zone, and they don't necessarily assert themselves like they should. And women, for some reason, we have a higher a penchant to basically have what's called imposter syndrome. Like, oh well, if there's not more women that look like me at this table, I must not be worthy of being here. And we've got to knock that off, ladies. You belong at every table. So make sure that you know that and respect that of yourself. But yeah, so I went and actually turned around and ended up taking over the organization. So I was pretty proud of that. So coming in as one of only 3, and you know, taking it over and really making a difference, and changing the thought process a little bit. The perfect example is human trafficking is a major issue in our country, and it's happening via our transportation network, right? And there was not one man around that table that would have even thought of, hey, as transportation officials, we need to take a stand and do something about that. And the other thing that people need to understand is it's 2020, women still make up 80% of the non-paid caregivers in the country. So that means they have to, all of those decision makings, which is why it's so crucial to have these women on your boards and make sure that they give the information and make sure that they're represented, because again, we're making progress in that area, but still 80% of the non-paid care. And that's even more important now than ever. So women, we've got to assert ourselves. Don't let your capacity dictate, don't let your comfort zone dictate your capacity zone, because you all deserve to be at the table, every one of you.
Oh, great comment. Sharon, what about your experience?
So, you know, I've had the privilege over my 13 and a half years at Christiana Care in watching really a dramatic evolution in the composition of the board of Christiana Care, right? So when I first came to the organization in 2007, our board was without a doubt white male dominated. And I would venture to say from an upper socioeconomic class. And over the past 13 years, have really watched our board transform into a robustly diverse board of women and men, of racial and ethnic diversity. And the difference that has made in how I believe our management team and I interact with the board, you know, it is tremendous. It has gone from really a sit and listen kind of board to a collaborate and contribute and work together, very interdigitated, to move this organization forward. And not just in terms of diversity of thought and vision, but really embracing that diversity of thought, recognizing it, respecting it. It is very different than what I would describe 10 or 12 years ago. And our organization and our community is without a doubt better for it. And so to Jennifer's comment about have a seat at the table, I would take that a step further, because if you are just going to pull your chair up to the table and sit there quietly, you are losing a golden opportunity. So have a seat at the table and use your brain and open your mouth and lean in and, share your ideas and be willing to say, maybe that wasn't the best idea. And maybe I failed a little bit in this particular interaction, but there's great learning from that for you as a female leader and for the board to be able to hear those things. And so, I think at Christiana Care in particular, we're privileged to have a very well-rounded collaborative board that has resulted really in our business results being very, very different than they would have been, I think, 10 or 12 years ago. And certainly during the pandemic has served us especially well.
That is a perfect segue, because we all know that, two of the primary responsibilities of the board is really focusing on, I'd say three: strategy, and then operational and business risk. Really trying to look at the organization, how best to protect the organization, how best to move it forward, identifying, risks and trying to mitigate those risks along the way. COVID-19. The pandemic, worldwide pandemic, which has had an adverse effect on almost every aspect of our lives when we think about it broadly. Let's talk about the pandemic and the reaction and response and role of the board, and whether having a diverse board made a difference in the decisions that the organization needed to make in response and reaction to that. I'm going to start with healthcare, because that's the natural place to start when you start talking about COVID-19. But Sharon, you just made the comment about the board being diverse, but also being collaborative. How did that impact decisions that needed to be made with respect to COVID-19?
So great question, Tony. And I can think of a couple examples. I mean, you talk about risk mitigation, and back in the spring in particular, when we were at the height of the pandemic, and, for most of us in healthcare, this is our first opportunity at leading through a pandemic. And for many of us, we're hoping it's our only opportunity to lead through a pandemic in our careers. But, having to ask a board or to collaborate with a board on making decisions, first of all, much more rapidly than we, have often had to make decisions, to take risks, whether they be operational, whether they be financial, and to have the support of the board to do the right thing as we move through the pandemic. So a great example, and I think this is where the voice of women really played a difference, is in how we cared for our very vulnerable workforce during the period of the pandemic. Healthcare continues to be a highly female-dominated group of professionals, nursing in particular. We have caregivers that we depended on to be here through the pandemic who were struggling with, where do I stay so I don't go home and infect my family? How do I care for my children who are now not in school, but I still need to go to work to care for the community during this pandemic? And so as an organization, we made a significant financial investment in paying for childcare, in paying for hotels so people weren't worried about going home, in buying certain supplies in the organization over and above the required PPE in order to support our caregivers in being able to do their job and reduce as much undue stress as possible. I believe, and I firmly believe, that the women on our board have an amazing sense of what that's like from a personal perspective, to have to juggle work and home and family and safety for themselves and others and still show up to work every day and do the best possible thing during very uncertain times for our community. And I think that degree of empathy and compassion and listening and lived experience as a working woman with children really contributed to us being able to, as a management team, make those decisions very rapidly, the board to understand, respect, and support that additional investment, and really focus on not just the pandemic in the community, but how are our 14,000 caregivers faring during all of this, particularly our female caregivers who, you know, as you said, Jen, continue to be the primary, you know, workhorse or caregiver in their personal lives and at home, in addition to what they were doing during the pandemic. And, you know, I firmly believe had we not had that diversity on our board, that would have been a much harder sell, a much harder explanation, and much harder to really get empathic buy-in, because the lived experience would not have been there.
No, I could not agree more. And so Soledad and Jennifer, let me ask you, did the same experience hold true in transportation in the midst of the pandemic and when you're in crisis mode, trying to respond and react? Did diversity on the board make a difference in any of the decisions that were being made? Jennifer, you want to start?
Sure. I think, you know, in transportation, it was interesting and challenging because, you know, half of my 2,500 workforce could telecommute. So that was an easy pivot. But the other half were frontline DMV workers. They were bus drivers. They were toll collectors. So there wasn't anything that we could do to have them telecommute, right? So the number one thing was communication. I mean, these are true feelings of people are scared. You know, they're hurt, they're anxious. These are serious mental health, you know, issues that, you know, as an employer, you need to address. So what we stood up an employee wellness group that was made up of employees from all different parts of the organization to say, what is it that you need? Yes, we can get you the PPE. Yes, we can make sure that all of your facilities are safe. But what do you really need as individuals to get through this? And that's basically what, you know, we're still doing, is getting through this. But I think that having a woman's kind of spin on it is that really taking that mental health kind of check. And, you know, this is to all of the folks that are on this, it's extremely important, and self-care is more important now than ever. So really talking to your employees, and, you know, we did lots of virtual town halls where, you know, we had, 1,000 employees tune in just because they want that information and they want to know how you're protecting them, not just, you know, in the workplace as their employer, but how are you helping them with their families and their mental health needs. I think that was just hugely important. And would it have been the same if it was not, didn't have a female perspective? I don't know. I would like to think it would still be the same, but I know that is the perspective that, you know, focusing, and women, we do this best. We're compassionate. We focus on the people, and I think that made all of the difference in my area.
Appreciate that. Soledad, what about your experience?
Yeah, I would agree with both Sharon and Jen. It was. And I do think that having women and women leadership made a difference, just based on some of the conversations we were having, like at the height of when we were first, like, you know, in March, when things were really, really bad. And even now, as we see cases begin to rise again, when we were talking about mental health, right? There's no shame in feeling how you feel right now. This is terrifying for people. And how are you going to continue to show up to work and make sure that your child is safe, right? Schools are still closed here. All of those things were absolutely true. I think that some of the questions around for our employees, so we had to transition. Aviation in the airport is a very kind of like in-person business. So transitioning a lot of people to work off-site who never did before was a challenge. And then one of the things that did arise was the isolation that a lot of people felt. right? And we had, we thought a lot and put a lot of effort into thinking about people with their families and their children, but we had staff members that were single and living in an apartment in Center City and feeling very isolated and alone. And so how do you connect with those folks? So we did a lot of boosting of our partnership with Penn Behavioral Health, making sure our employees knew that they had access to resources and talking about it. I think it's important. And I think that maybe we do this better, admitting like, I am struggling right now, and it's okay to say that. And I know where I can go to get support and help. Add to that, right, what also happened during this time, with the George Floyd and all of the racial unrest that we saw. And most of our frontline employees, our custodians, the folks who are the lowest paid, are people of color. And so they're watching their neighborhoods on fire. They're terrified of COVID. And they were just like, where do I put this? Where do I put this? And, we had deaths from COVID. It was a really challenging time. So I think the mental health aspect is a really important point to make. And I do believe that having that sense of there's no shame, which I think tends to be a more, I hate to say it that way, but I think we think about it differently with respect to it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to show that you're not made of steel all the time. And I think that, there was this time when I think that was socialized, or we were socialized to believe that being empathetic was equated to being weak. And we did not want to be perceived that way as women leaders. And I'm so happy that now it's like, oh no, that's a strength. That is what makes you strong and what adds to the diversity. And when people and employees, in my experience, feel like you care about them, you care about their well-being, they will absolutely show up for you. They will absolutely give you everything if they believe that you really do are invested in their success and their well-being.
It is so true. And, it's interesting. We could talk about this topic for 2 hours. But I'm conscious of time, and I absolutely want to ask a question and have each of you respond, because I think it's important. So we heard Stephanie talk about the new goal, gender balance. It's no longer about 20% of women on boards, 50-50, that's our new target, gender balance on boards. The experience that you all went through as a result of the pandemic, the empathetic nature and reaction and response of the women on your boards, what lessons were learned? And then do you think that having that female perspective in the boardroom during this time of crisis, will it help get support for the work towards gender balance 50-50? Do you think it was enough of an example and an experience that people really saw the difference and they see the value and will work harder to accomplish that goal? Or do you think we still have a bit of an uphill battle? Jennifer, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I think it's definitely had an impact. And I can tell you that, from a Leadership Delaware standpoint, is we've always strived for what we call balance. And that's not just, I try to stay away from using the diversity and inclusion because it seems too HRE to me. But when we're focusing on balance, not just gender balance, but, ethnic balance, sexual orientation balance, all of those things. I think that the pandemic put a kind of hyper focus on making sure that you have that balance, because what is being experienced in the African-American community right now is different than what is being in the, down in Sussex County and Delaware in the Hispanic community. So having those different perspectives really kind of shined a light on the differences. And I think that it has an impact. I hope it holds. I know that I'm going to make sure it holds here at Leadership Delaware, but I really hope it holds, across the globe, because I do believe it has made an impact having those different perspectives, not just female, but that total balance. Because again, everybody's experiencing different things in different communities right now. And I think that it's extremely important. And again, hope it holds globally.
Could not agree more. Soledad, I'll go to you next.
I agree. I think it was really well said. I think that We learned a lot, and we will continue to learn more during this time about the importance of voices and the diversity of voices and being compassionate and empathetic. And I hope it holds too. I'm going to do my best to make sure it does in the spheres that I'm in. And I'm glad that I can count on other women to hold the line also.
Appreciate that. Sharon.
Yeah, so I think the lessons, Doneen, are, come to me about balance too, right? No matter what industry we're in or what board we sit on, it's about the business, but it's also about the people, right? And that's where diversity, I think, of thought and composition really makes a difference, right? We need to be able to think at work, but we need to be able to feel at work too, especially during this pandemic. And to see, as Soledad said, empathy, compassion, not as strengths, but also as imperatives that leaders bring those to the workplace, mid-pandemic or otherwise, right? And communication is important, but I think we also learned that it's not just about communication, it's about transparent communication and the message resonating with the people that we lead in an organization. And so, for me, the lessons learned are around that, transparency and over communication and collaboration, and making room for women leaders to not just step up, but for us as other women who are leaders to help pull them up or push them up, so that they have the opportunity to contribute, whether again it's in a management role or whether it's in a board role, because we need that representation. So I do think, Doneen, we still have a little bit of an uphill battle, but pulling together or pushing together, I think makes that hill a little less steep. So we can't lose that momentum, but there's terrific opportunity to capitalize, I think, on all of the benefits that women have brought to leadership teams and boards during the pandemic, and keep that momentum moving forward.
I have to say, I agree with each of you. And I am I'm excited on the one hand. I'm excited because we have what's often described as a perfect storm in some other areas. It's a perfect storm when it comes to board diversity. We've been hearing about this for a number of years. We've had a number of companies commit to increase diversity. Stephanie read the statistics in terms of the increase in the number of women on boards in Delaware and in Philadelphia compared to national trends. And I'm excited because I think we are going to have more of a commitment. I mean, NASDAQ coming out and asking for approval for their new requirement is just, one example of that. But when you have the business necessity, when you have the result of how organizations and industries have had to deal with, cope with, and respond to the pandemic, and as each of you have identified, the role that women's voices in the room had as part of that process, not just the collaboration, but the empathy, the focus on well-being, the shared experience and the lived experience, as you noted, of women who've had to juggle and trying to understand what organizations needed to do to best take care of their workforce. I think that is the beginning of much more work to come, but we've seen the outcomes and the good outcomes because of it. People have felt supported. Each of you have noted in your organizations how your employees and the caregivers have responded positively because they felt supported. They felt like you were with them and you knew what they needed. And that comes from the top, but also comes from the bottom. And the board is a critical link in all of that. The leaders can't do what they need to do for their organizations if the board is not supportive. And so having that support, having that leadership from the board and having the right voices in the room matters. I certainly hope that this is, for us, the beginning of many, many conversations. I think there's probably 6 more hours we could spend talking about various aspects of this, but I hope what we were able to do today is to highlight for the audience, one, the significance of having the female voice in the room, the significance of having the collaboration between women leaders and the board, the significance in terms of the difference it can make when you have, the lived experience and the empathy and that perspective when you're making decisions that affect not only an organization, but in many instances, an entire industry. So I hope we all learn as a result of what's coming out of the pandemic. We've all been living all things COVID. And I know we're all very hopeful that it comes to an end very soon, but the lessons learned coming out of it, I hope are setting us up fairly well so that we can accomplish the goal that Stephanie outlined at the beginning of the program, really getting to gender balance, really getting to that 50-50 mark. Because when you have equal voices in the room and various lived experiences, that diversity of thought, experience, and the emotion that comes with it can only make organizations better. So thank you all so very much. This has been a wonderful conversation. I can't thank you enough for your time. Elaine, I certainly think I know from the moderator's perspective, as I said, I could go on and on and on. But again, I thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. I thank our panelists for joining us. And Elaine and Jennifer, I will turn it back over to you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Thank you, Deneen, and our extraordinary panelists. So many excellent points and great insights about the importance of women. It was wonderful to hear all of the experiences and the perspectives and how each of our panelists have positively impacted not only their businesses, but how they've also paved the way for women. So true pioneers. And speaking of pioneers, we have Jen Smuts also on screen, and I want to recognize Jennifer Smuts for being a pioneer. For those of you who don't know, Jennifer is responsible for bringing 2020 Women on Boards to Wilmington. So we thank you for that and appreciate that.
Pleasure, and thank you. You didn't have to do that. I appreciate it though.
Absolutely. So the time has come, Jen, for us to wrap up and close. We want to thank all of you for participating today. We hope you found it inspiring, energizing, and informative. Before we close, we want to do a special shout out to our production team, Lynn Evans, Jennifer Kamech, Kat Cody, and Heather Spilsbury. I think everything went most smoothly, and most importantly, we want to thank all of you for also being with us today. Having more women and more diversity on boards will make businesses perform stronger. And so it's an important business imperative. And remember, the data proves it. More diversity and more women on boards equals stronger performance. So let's keep the momentum going. To close, I'm reminded of an old African proverb that says, when you want to go fast, you go alone. And when you want to go far, we go together. And so thank all of you for being with us today together on this journey. When one of us rises, we all rise.
Absolutely. That was beautiful. Yes, thank you for that. And so we'll shift gears now to go to our breakout sessions. And this is the part of the program that has a focus on you, the attendees. Our breakout rooms, of course, are led by our incredible director coaches. And now's the time for you to connect with those director coaches and ask some questions with regards to your path to the boardroom, and of course, helping you be successful once you land that opportunity. The link for the breakout session can be found either in your calendar appointment or I noticed it's just been posted into the chat as well. So if you can't find it in your appointment, you can copy it from the chat here. And once you have successfully copied that, feel free to log off from this event and tap into your breakout rooms. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, enjoy your chat.